Are nested list comprehensions a bad idea? Here's a nested list comprehension. This is a list comprehension with another list comprehension inside its mapping part. List comprehensions create a new list, and since we've embedded a comprehension within a comprehension, this code creates a list of lists. I don't find this code very readable, but I don't think the comprehensions are the problem here. The problem is our use of whitespace. Here's the same code broken up over multiple lines. I find this code much more readable. But is it more or less readable than an equivalent for loop would be? Here's the same code without any list comprehensions. We have a loop within a loop here. The inner loop builds up a new list for each iteration of the outer loop, and the outer loop appends each of those inner lists to an outer list. This code is pretty readable, but the purpose of this code might not be obvious at a glance. Here's the same code with an inner comprehension and an outer loop. To me, the purpose of this code seems a bit more obvious at a glance than the loop within a loop approach. Python's for loops are for looping over an iterable while doing something. So when I see a loop within a loop, I think nested looping. I don't immediately think we're building up a list of lists. I'd need to read through the code a little bit more closely to figure out that that is its purpose. Comprehensions are specifically for building up new lists. So whenever I see a comprehension, I think we're building a new list. And when I see nested comprehensions, I think we're building a list of lists. For loops showcase the looping, while comprehensions showcase the list making. When we use comprehensions, our code looks like the data structure that we're trying to create. That's not the case when we use for loops. When I'm building up a new list, I usually prefer to use comprehensions, if I reasonably can. Note that I just said reasonably. When it comes to using comprehensions, what is reasonable? For example, is this reasonable? This is a comprehension within a comprehension, and both the inner and the outer comprehensions have a lot of logic within them. The result is a list within a list, just as before, but this code isn't very readable. Interestingly, unwrapping those into a for loop also isn't very readable. We could make this for loop a bit easier to read by creating a function or two to help give names to some of the operations that we're performing. So here we're using this score status function within our append call in our inner loop. This for loop is a lot more readable than the comprehension that we started with. But now that we've broken up our code, would a comprehension be more readable in this case? This comprehension doesn't look so bad. Sometimes an unreadable comprehension may be a hint that your code has too much logic shoved into one loop. Sometimes the phrase nested comprehension is used to describe a different sort of nesting. We just looked at a comprehension inside of a comprehension, but it's also possible to write comprehensions that contain multiple loops. Here's a comprehension with nested loops. This comprehension is equivalent to these for loops. Some Python programmers always avoid writing comprehensions with multiple loops. I don't agree with that approach. While I do agree that this comprehension is less readable than this for loop, it's due again to the lack of whitespace. Breaking that comprehension up over multiple lines makes it easier to see what's happening. Though keep in mind that because the loops in a comprehension must be in the same order as the equivalent for loops, it does read a little funny. We start with the outer loop and then work our way downward, which means the variable that we used in the first mapping part of our comprehension isn't introduced until the last for line. Python often reads like English, but it really doesn't in the case of comprehensions with nested loops. Despite the order of the for clauses sounding a bit awkward in English, I do sometimes use comprehensions with nested loops. Whenever I see nested loops in a comprehension, I think flattening. We're taking an iterable of iterables and flattening it into a single list. But when I see nested for loops, I don't think flattening. After all, our first example also involved nested for loops, but it didn't flatten anything. Just as with single loop comprehensions, multi-loop comprehensions can be a mental shortcut that helps us quickly identify the purpose of some code, specifically to flatten nested iterables. Whether we're talking about comprehensions with multiple loops or comprehensions within comprehensions, nested comprehensions can sometimes be helpful tools for making more readable Python code. But readability is a subjective measure, so the next time you find yourself making a list of lists or flattening a list of lists, try out the comprehension approach and then ask yourself, is the for loop or the comprehension more readable?